Hello. Because I'm not able to do an intervention at half term, I thought I'd do this quick video just so we can go through some of the expectations for English Language Paper 2, and hopefully be a bit of a guide for how we approach the paper. Just as a reminder, Language Paper 2, we're talking about the writer's viewpoints and perspectives. So this means what are they thinking and what are they feeling? And their perspectives, we're thinking about how do they understand that topic? Are they observers or do they have first-hand experience? Is this something that's new to them, so they're novices, or are they experts in this issue? We want to think about their context so we can fully understand what their viewpoints and perspectives are and what they're influenced by. For this paper, we've got an hour and 45 minutes. And just like paper 1, it's in two halves. Section A is reading and section B is creative writing. So we want to leave those 45 minutes for section B, okay, which is going to be our epic argument. And then 1 hour will be section A. Okay, we're going to be spending an hour on our reading. For language paper 2, we have two sources. Okay, so there's quite a bit of reading. It can be overwhelming, and there are ways to kind of chunk up the reading if we want to just manage that cognitive load. So we'll look at that as we're going through the paper. So one of your sources will be a modern source, that's 20th century and beyond. That means it's after 1900, okay? And one of them will be 19th century. So the 19th century we know a bit about because we studied A Christmas Carol. So this is Victorian England, and so we do have some contextual knowledge of what it was like in Victorian England. We can use that literature knowledge. Before we start reading, we need to remember that we're not coming to this with empty brains where we're not going to understand anything they're talking about. We're coming to this with a wealth of knowledge about things we've learned not only in literature, GCSE, but also in our Key Stage 3 English, in our other subjects. So all that knowledge you have in your brains is going to be useful for helping you read and understand these two texts. So obviously I'm not going to write anything until I've read the extract, but what I am going to do is I'm going to take a quick glance at the questions in order to help me read more strategically. So the questions are going to guide my reading. So question 1 is based on source A, lines 1 to 21. And so I'm going to start with source A. Okay, so we've got source A is a 20th century literary non-fiction. So this means that everything that happened in this text is factual, it's not made up. Just like in language paper 1, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to read what is in the box, and we are going to be looking for people, place and plot. Okay, so this is an extract from an essay written in 1967 called The Village That Lost Its Children by Laurie Lee. Now I'm going to circle the writer's surname because we don't use their first name when we're writing. So Lee is the writer. Aberfan was a small mining village in Wales. In 1966, many of its people, including children at a local school, were killed when heavy rain caused a landslide. So, as I said, we're looking for people, place and plot. What has happened, who's involved, and where has it happened? So it's happened in Aberfan, which is a small mining village in Wales. So I might think about what are the expectations for a small mining village in Wales. When I think of the image of a village, what do I think about? Is it secure or is it vulnerable? And I think generally the idea of the countryside and villages, the image is quite secure. Okay. I might think about, is it innocent or corrupt? And a village again, I think about innocence rather than corruption. But then maybe the mining aspect we've done about the industrial age and the exploitation of workers when we were reading our power and conflict poetry. So there is some sense of corruption there, and maybe exploitation. So I've got my place, and I want to think about who the people are. So in 1966, many of its people, including children at a local school, so that's who the people are. So definitely, if I'm asking myself whether children are innocent and corrupt, I'm going to go with innocent. I'm going to go with vulnerable, not secure. Okay. And that made me think about stability and instability. So maybe I might add about stability with the village. Again, we expect villages to be quite calm and peaceful, don't we? Not unstable. Which brings us on to the plot. Okay, we've got heavy rain caused landslide and it kills a lot of children. So here we've got instability and we've got tragedy. I think the fact that the writer has chosen to focus on the children adds to that sense of tragedy. And I think that's all we need to get from that box. To read the rest of the text, I might have a quick glance at the other questions to guide. So question 2 is talking about the differences, summarise the differences between Aberfan and London. So we know this is Aberfan, we've just read that. So I want to be looking at what Aberfan is like. Okay. So I might make a note at the top. I want to know what Aberfan's like. That's going to be useful. Question 3, which is also source A. We love it when that happens because that means I can answer 2 questions before moving on to reading source B. Let's highlight the line. So 27 to 40. And we're looking at the description of the coal pit. So I might go to my page and find 27 to 40. And just remind myself that I need to be thinking about the coal tips as I read. And then the final question is both sources, and we're thinking about the events that are described. So that's quite vague, but I want to be thinking about how the events are portrayed. Okay. So remember that when we read it for the first time, we are the reader. So we are thinking about what the impact on us is. What does the writer do? What do they make us think, feel, wonder as readers? And also, what do we understand about how the writer thinks and feels in this extract? So, the village that lost its children. Few people had ever heard of Aberfan until disaster struck. It was just another of the small mining villages lying tucked away in South Wales valleys, a huddle of anonymous terraced houses of uniform ugliness, unrelieved except for a chapel and a pub. So there's this sense of it being anonymous, just another. And I'm thinking what's revealed in this paragraph is this sense of it being ordinary. Okay. So because it's ordinary, would we find it comforting or banal? So comforting. Again, we've got stability. That this sense of stability, comfort, banality about the village. Nothing unusual is being flagged in that first paragraph. And I think maybe why is the writer doing that? And it's to kind of highlight the fact that this is just a normal place. Almost as if extraordinary events can happen to anybody, regardless of how stable their life is. Okay. At its heart was the coal pit, and its environment, like the others, the debris of a slowly exhausting industry, a disused canal, some decaying rail tracks, a river black as sticks, a general coating of grime over the roofs and gardens, and the hills above blistered with a century of mining waste. So we've got a description of Aberfan there, and I want to think, well, what is Aberfan being described like? And I might start quite simple and think, well, is it positive or negative? Is the writer, do they seem to have a positive opinion or a negative opinion? And I think there's quite a bit of negativity here. Okay, so what is it that's negative? We've got this idea of disused canal, decaying rail tracks, a river black as a stick. So it's got one of those little numbers there. So finding out what is the Styx. The Styx was a river in Greek mythology that was supposed to separate the world of the living from the world of the dead. So I want to think, well, why would the writer describe it as being between the living and the dead? I might just make a note there of the meaning, just to remind me for later. A coating of grime as well. We've got this idea of grime. It is almost as if everything is dying. So it subverts our expectations of that village, doesn't it? Because it doesn't sound stable, it doesn't sound comforting, it doesn't seem innocent. Perhaps this is what the corruption of the coal pit does. This idea of a heart as well. Yeah. Such villagers learned to accept a twilight world where most of the menfolk worked down the pit. Many died early with their lungs full of coal dust, and the life was traditionally grim and perilous. Disaster, in effect, was about the only news that ever came out of the valleys. The sudden explosion underground, miners entombed alive, or the silent death in the dark from gas. Wales and the world were long hardened to such news, but not to what happened in Aberfan. So again, we've got this sense of kind of negativity, this sense that death and tragedy are part of normal life. This sudden explosion, silent death. In fact, they're hardened to this news suggests like a callous disregard for death. Or a callous disregard for tragedy. And we might think when it comes to understanding people's thoughts and feelings, we've talked about, like if we think back to an Inspector Calls and how the different characters respond to Eva Smith's death and the working class, we use those words where we thought about, is it trivialised, is it normalised, or is it glamorised? And we can use those words when we're looking at our language paper too, as well. So are things normalised, where they just seem everyday and not out of the ordinary? Are they trivialised, where they're made to seem silly and unimportant? Or are they glamorised, where they're made to seem exciting? Okay, so here I would say that tragedy is normalised. Doesn't quite go as far as trivialised. It's using language like entombed and silent death, quite graphic language, but it does tell us that people are hardened to such news. A coal mine sends to the surface more waste than coal, and a mining village has to learn to live with it. It must be put somewhere or the mine would close. It's too expensive to carry it far, so the tips grow everywhere, straddling the hillsides, nudging the houses like black-furred beasts. Almost everyone from time to time has seen danger in them, but mostly they are endured as a fact of life. Okay, so we're learning what the coal tips are here, because I wasn't sure previously. Like I knew a tip is a dump, but here we're finding out what question 2 is about, which is why it can be quite useful to read the questions first, because we go, okay, so that's what a coal tip is. So the tips are these different piles of waste that are all around. On the mountain above Aberfan, there were 7 such tips. The evening sun sank early behind them. To some of the younger generation, they had always been there, as though dumped by the hand of God. They could be seen from the school windows immediately below them, rising like black pyramids in the western sky. But they were not as solid as they looked. It was known that several had moved in the past, inching ominously down the mountain. Okay, so again, I'm trying to think about what is revealed here, how is that making me feel, and what does it tell me about what the writer is thinking and feeling. What is revealed here is that these tips are common. There's 7 tips. My impression of these tips is that they are big, vast. They're rising like black pyramids. Okay. So if I'm thinking of the pyramids, I'm thinking of something potent. In fact, there's a sense of kind of omnipotence here because it mentions God. And there's also, if I'm thinking about stability and instability, which I think has been a bit of a theme here, I'm seeing instability, aren't I? We're being introduced to instability, and that creates tension. Because it's a bit like that knowledge of what's going to happen. We know the children are going to be killed before we read it. So this kind of hinting at instability makes us worry because we know that it is inevitable. There's inevitable tragedy. What was not known, however, was that the newest tip, number 7, was a killer with a rotten heart. It had been begun in Easter 1958. It had and was built on a mountain spring, most treacherous of all foundations. Gradually over the years, the fatal seeping of water was turning Tip 7 into a mountain of moving muck. Okay, so again, it kind of built on that idea of something inevitable. Then one morning out of the mist, the unthinkable happened, and the tip came down on the village. The children of Pancras Junior School had just arrived in their classrooms and were right in the path of it. They were the first to be hit by a wave of stupefying filth which instantly smothered more than 100 of them. So we've got this sense of something of it being inescapable, unavoidable, like it happened so fast. So we sort of see the kind of potency of the mountain of moving muck. So the catastrophe was not only the worst in Wales, but an event of such wanton and indifferent cruelty that it seemed to put shame to both man and God. I think, reading that line, I think this is one of the most important lines in the extract for telling us how the writer feels here. So we've got the word catastrophe, which makes us understand that it is a major event. And it's not only the worst in Wales, but it's an event of such wanton and indifferent cruelty that it seems to put shame to both man and God. So this word indifferent cruelty suggests that it's the result of, and let's go back with callous disregard, because it reminds me of that callous disregard that the bourgeoisie have for the proletariat. So we're seeing perhaps a similar perspective to Priestley in that he's wanting to emphasize the exploitation and the sort of vulnerability of the proletariat. Yeah, always try and add anything to the end of proletariat, but I don't need to. So it's the fact it's called cruelty. It's intentional. It's malicious. And we know it's not intentional or malicious, but because it says that, it makes me think about that idea of it being too expensive to carry it forward. Okay. Sorry, guys. I will come back after the fire alarm. Sorry about that. I hope all of you are all right with that interrupting your exam. Just to finish the sentence, I want to focus on this word shame. And when I think of the word shame, I think guilt, responsibility, and blame. Again, I'm getting Inspector Call's feelings with Mrs. Berlin saying she's done nothing she's ashamed of. So this writer, I feel, is really judging those people in power who didn't protect the village from this landslide. And the fact that he doesn't just blame man, but also God, makes it seem very sinful.